Okay, fall and winter planting in Southern California. Now this is more the result, this photo with all of these nasturtiums, because some of my nasturtiums are just starting to come up now. And of course, some of the roses are looking beautiful. The hollyhocks have not come up yet. The bachelor buttons are not up yet. All of that will be coming up in the early spring. One of the things about nasturtiums that I love is years ago, I had a tremendous number of seeds and I literally just threw them out all over the garden. And so they have been coming up year after year after year. And they are a real resource for your garden in, now of course it's mid-November, and they can be coming up between now and all the way through January, just on their own, self-seeding themselves from last year's crop. And the thing I do is that when they crowd out into the pathways or are smothering a plant that I really want to be thriving, I will just rip up the foliage of the nasturtium and I'll just let it sit where it is. And that will then provide like a mulch for the soil underneath. And then it will gradually dry up and break down and it will just have all that nutrition going right into the soil where it is. So, veggies to plant. Now, all of these that I'm going to be talking about, they're all photos from my garden, unless the ones that I talk about, like there's one of poppies that I took at the poppy preserve out in the Antelope Valley. But all of these are both seeds and transplants, like the little 6-packs or the 4-inch size. I do not recommend anything larger than a 4-inch size, however, because especially with vegetables, but true with all ornamental plants and vegetables, they will adapt much better to their local new home in your garden than if you try to get a gallon size that then has to do a lot of transitioning in order to be successful and really connect with the soil and has its roots extending out into your native soil. Okay, so this is a artichoke, and you'll notice that there's the leaves that don't have what is called cuts. This is a highly cut leaf. This is the mature leaf of the artichoke, as you'll see from the center plant here. These are amongst the first leaves that come up. So there are many plants that will have different shapes and sizes of leaves, and this is called a true leaf. And many of the advising is that when you are starting from your own seed, that you wait until you have a true leaf before you transplant that plant, just so that it is mature enough with enough of a root system so that you can get it to transplant more easily. Now I've indicated this, included this. This is a pot that is probably 18 or 20 inches wide. And it's also that deep. And the whole point with containers generally is that you want to have a deeper container than it is wide, because all of this depth in there is going to be root zone friendly, so that the plant can thrive more, because all the water will go down, the coolness will go down, and therefore the roots will be much happier for a longer period of time. Now, this has the one artichoke in the center, and those roots will go down quite deep into the container. These smaller plants, like I think it's a batch of herbs, and here's some purple basil, some oregano, maybe some lettuce in there. All of those roots are very shallow, like maybe 6, 8, 10 inches. So you don't have the competition between the root systems, between the large single perennial artichoke and the little annual plants that you put around there. But that way you're able to have much more growing in that single container. Asparagus, you always want to let all of this fern develop rather than cutting it off. So once the shoots, it'll take about 3, perhaps 4 years after you've planted the roots for them to be the size of maybe one of your fingers or even your thumb. And that is when you want to harvest them. You really should leave the little skinny guys who are maybe no larger than your little finger. You should leave those in there because they will continue to absorb the energy and develop the root system much more before you're taking it apart by harvesting. So this is after maybe 5 or 6 years that you will have all that roots in there so extensive that it will put up this number of shoots in the early spring. Beets, of course, have now available in many colors, including the Target one here, the Chioggia. But remember that the greens on the beets are really wonderful too. Both raw, my husband prefers them raw in a salad, along with all the other greens. He really doesn't like greens that are cooked. Even though, of course, that's my favorite when you add some garlic and leeks in there and maybe some parsley or cilantro. But anyway, there are so many different flavors now. Now, I grew up on the Detroit dark red, so to me, that's the correct beet flavor. But all of these others with all the colors, and you can just make an exquisitely beautiful salad, whether it's however you prepare the beets. Broccoli. Now you'll notice that this head is made up of a batch of little headlets, and there's a variety called purple sprouting broccoli that puts up only these little tiny guys that are already bite-sized, whereas on a regular variety of broccoli, once you cut off the single head, it will put up all these little ones all over in all the different nodes, which is where the leaf connects with the stem. And that way you'll have all these little individual bite-sized pieces that won't take all that extra prep in the kitchen to cut a big head. Cabbages, several different kinds here. All of them tasting about the same, very cabbagey. This is a cabbage that has been allowed to mature too far, and consequently, it literally is sending up a shoot here for the seed that it will contain in order to start new plants. Now, one thing about growing your own is that you can taste different parts of that plant all the way through the growing different stages of maturity. So you may find that you will like to eat all these outer leaves, or they may be too tough for you. But certainly try them before you throw the plant away. Just because it doesn't look like what it did in the store doesn't mean that there aren't all other different stages of maturity that are going to be really good to eat, and that you can get a lot more food out of your garden because you are eating them at different stages. Now this photo, these are not humongous carrots the size of this cabbage. This is just a very close-up picture of a variety that is called Romeo. And these little guys are literally an inch wide by an inch tall. So these are great carrots to grow in a garden that you have really clay soil, because the carrot seed and the carrot root do not have much of the strength in order to push through heavy clay soil. So one thing you can do is sow your carrot seeds mixed in with radish seeds, whether or not you eat radishes, because what will happen is that the radish seed will germinate very much more quickly, like within a couple days. The carrots may take a good 3 weeks to germinate. But what happens with the radish seed is it'll germinate and it'll just gradually push away the soil around it as it develops. And that will make any of the soil that might have crusted over with watering, it'll keep it moving, so to speak, so that the carrot seed, which isn't very strong at pushing the soil, it will be able to germinate much more easily. Now the cauliflower, these three are all cauliflower. This is the one that looks like what we are purchasing at the store. But as a beginning gardener, you have to be aware of how big the plant is going to be when it is mature. Now this is going to be about a good 2-3 feet across. So you need to be able to plan for that when you plant your transplant. Now this little guy is called buttoning, because what happens is that this little head, which now is already beyond going the firmness of this one, it's only the size of a button. And what happened is that cauliflower is notorious for being stressed out. And this is what happens when it gets stressed out. And that may have happened, you know, in the nursery. You buy a pack of 6 packs and one of them turns out like this guy. You just rip it out and throw it away after you nibble the little bit of the head up here, because it probably had nothing to do with your care. It was already stressed out before it even got to be sold by the nursery. Now this is ricing of the cauliflower in the same way that the cabbage was gone way beyond in setting up its seed stalk. This cauliflower, each one of these was one of these, but it has gone beyond that now. And so it literally looks like bits of rice on there. And it gets kind of this creamy, beigey kind of color when it has been literally sunburnt a little bit. Celery, now this is the part, just the stalks, is the part that we recognize that we buy at the store. But it has at least another half of the plant that is all foliage when you grow it yourself. So especially if you are a cook who grows, who cooks soups and stews, and certainly as we're moving into the cool weather, that will be more of my menu items. And that's when I love the celery, because all of this part I will chop up and use as nutrition to get from in my soups and stews. Now, one thing you do need to be aware of about celery is that as you know, you like it nice and crunchy, which means it's full of water. If it gets kind of flabby looking, then that means it's not getting enough water. So be sure to water it a lot. And one reason for that is that it does best growing through the cool season, when any of the water that you apply will not be evaporated immediately the way it is during the hot weather times. And it also will remain sweeter when it is growing quickly, like carrots, during the cool season. If it really slows down and is not watered very well, both of those get to have a really strong flavor that's not necessarily pleasant. So keeping them watered in the cool season is the time really to grow those. Chard, of course, is coming out with all these different beautiful colors. Chives, here's the round stem with the pink flowers, or the flat stem with the white flowers. This is called onion chives because it has that mild flavor of onions. And this is called garlic chives because it smells and tastes more like garlic. Cilantro is a wonderful addition. Now, some people cannot tolerate the flavor. It tastes like soap to them. And this is a genetic thing. I mean, genetic in the person. Some people just can't do it, and others of us love the cilantro. So be aware of that before you grow it, whether or not you really like to eat cilantro. And cilantro is much more responsive to heat. It'll bolt to put out its flowers like this very quickly when there's just a spot of heat during the winter or early spring. So I find it more useful to scatter more seeds about every couple weeks so that I have a fresh crop rather than having it potentially go to seed, and I can't, when I cut off the greenery with parsley, it will grow back pretty quickly, but cilantro doesn't seem to be anywhere near as strong. So sometimes it'll just go ahead and bolt. Here's fava beans on fava plants, and this is maybe 5-6 feet tall, so it's quite a large plant, but it has these beautiful blossoms that are white and black in there, and then of course it turns into the pods. Fennel, both green and kind of a grayish brown. This makes a beautiful plant in the garden, and it does self-sow pretty easily, but they're also very easy to pull up. So it's kind of not a big thing about having them be as viable as they are. Garlic, this was a plant that I had planted one garlic clove next to a rose bush, and then I never harvested that clove, so it had turned into a full head, and then that next spring each of those cloves had sent up its own shoots. So what I did was I dug it up and separated them into their individual cloves and shoots, and went ahead and replanted those so that then I would have even more garlic. This is a technique of utilizing a seed bed for different varieties of little seeds, and then I could take care of, this is about a 2-foot by 2-foot area, and I can make sure that they're coming up okay and that I'm watering them and all that. And once each of these batches is getting to transplant size, then I go ahead and take individual ones out and I plant it elsewhere in the garden. And with the general delay of about a week for transplanting, you know, when it's growing fine, then you dig it up and you plant it somewhere else, and it has to reconnect with that new soil and putting out its roots to start redeveloping the plant. That takes about a week of delay. And consequently, when you start all the seeds in a batch like this, the different varieties, and then you transplant them every week or so, that means that the resulting plants will be about a week apart in maturity. So if you're doing cabbages or cauliflowers or anything that's going to be offset that extra week, then that will enable you to not have 500 cauliflowers all at once having to deal with. This is a bed of what's called mesclun, which literally just means a combination of all sorts of greens. You know, here we've got the bok choy, we've got some red mustard, we've got some arugula, different stuff in there. And different companies have different collections. Like Renee's Seeds has an Asian collection that is for stir fry, but there's also an Asian collection that is for spicy stir fry. So that way you can grow it all in one batch. You don't have to get individual plants of individual different varieties. You just kind of snip however much you want, and then you put it in a salad or your stir fry or however you're going to prepare it. And that way you automatically get quite a variation of greens. These are all different kales. There was a year that I grew about 7 different kinds of kale just to see which ones grew the best, but also which ones I liked the flavor of the best, and how long it took each one before it bolted completely, set up its seed stalk, and no longer had the flower or the leaves that I wanted to eat. So I did find that this one, the Tuscan kale, or the dinosaur kale, this is Lacellata is its botanic name. And this one was the only one that didn't bolt inside of another year. But what it did do was it kept growing its stem up and up and up and up, so that I was always harvesting just the outer, fresh, new, tender leaves. So that's how to grow many of these things. Just keep on going, and up until the point that they do end up bolting. Now here's a horse watering trough that this person has punched a couple holes in the bottom for drainage, and then filled it with the potting mix and planted all sorts of stuff in here, which is great because this is like 2.5, 3 feet high, and consequently even tomato plants could grow in there very nicely, and they have extremely large, deep root system if the conditions are set well. And even the squash can get to 2.5, 3 feet for their root zones. This is an example of how to intensively plant a particular bed. On this side, it's my pathway. So I've planted all these different lettuces right there because I'm going to be harvesting them about at least once a week. And you'll notice how close they are. This is a Bib Buttercrunch lettuce that I've allowed to form all of its leaves. And now I will go in here and I will harvest on each plant. I will harvest the outer leaves, leaving only the 2 or 3 center leaves that are maybe 1 inch in size to continue growing that plant. And inside of another week or so, those outer leaves will have developed and I'll be able to harvest them. So it means that I'll have months and months and months of harvesting off of these same plants, instead of letting one get really big, harvesting it, and then having all the other mature heads to plant as well. So this is next to the pathway. This is a leek. My tomato cages here I use for peas during the cool season. And then at the back is where I will put the cauliflower or the cabbage, because on the other side of this is a deep, well, it's a bit of a hill there. So I don't want to have to go over to this side more than once during the, when I'm going to harvest that cauliflower or that cabbage. Now, green and purple cauliflower. And you know, you can eat the leaves on these too. It's a bit tougher. And you do have to peel this. It's quite a heavy cuticle on the thing. And even the purple cauliflower, kohlrabi, is a green flesh, just like the green outside kohlrabi. These are leeks that I've scattered seed in a big row. This is also a leek that I had to purchase, of all things. Purchase some leeks because I didn't have any at the time. And I figured I'll get a second crop off of it by, you know, the way leeks have that little bit of roots generally attached. So I cut an inch above the roots and I planted it. And so the interior did send up new shoots. And the very light green is the portion that then I was able to reutilize. So get a little bit of economic benefit out of having purchased it in the first place. This leek is in the garden, and this is its seed head that it has sent up. Now this is a stalk at the very center of the leek. So this is your cue that you now have to harvest this particular leek. And what you can do is you slice it all the way through down to the base, and then you pull out the two halves that you've cut of the seed stalk. And then the rest of it is just fine to be able to utilize. But this interior seed stalk, you can't just break it off and hope that the plant is going to revert to growing more of its regular flesh. It's not going to happen, because once it's shifted into the hormonal change of putting up the seed stalk, that's it. It's just going to send up another seed stalk. But you can utilize the rest of the plant by taking out that stem and then cutting up the rest of the light green portion. And I found that this was not edible the first time I tried this, because I just chopped the whole thing up and put it in my stew. And then we were picking out little pieces of what felt like cardboard, because what has happened is that this whole flesh has turned into like a cellulose that we as people can't chew. So that's how I learned that you had to take this out, but the rest of it was edible. Here's a bed of the lettuce that I've planted that I will harvest once a week. Here is some of that lettuce as it has bolted. And you see that each one of these mini rows, I had 4 of each kind of different lettuce. So some of these had gotten quite extensively the bloom on them. These just have the little flowers at the very top these haven't even started to bloom yet. So what you need to do is when it starts pushing up a little taller, what is happening is that the nodes are elongating in there, meaning that it has starting into that shift of the hormones. You need to taste a leaf of that plant because it may have turned bitter. Now, some of us enjoy bitter more than others, but you will find that there will be a point at which each one of those is just too bitter for you to eat. Therefore, that's when you know you have to either let it go ahead and set up its bloom so that you can save the seed, or rip the plant out and put it in the compost pile. So these are several different kinds of the different lettuce leaf shapes and colors. Here's some of that red mustard that was in the mesclun mix. And this is a bok choy that you see how it has elongated. It was just a little clump like this, a little head that I harvested the leaves, but now it has bolted up. And I have found, when I urge you to taste at different maturity levels for each plant, that's when I found that this stem was much sweeter than it had been during the regular part of the season where I was just pulling off the individual outer leaves. So in a sense, I preferred what this tasted like at the end of the season when it was bolting. These are onions in the tire to kind of corral it. This was up at the Pasadena community garden. Here is the bolted head of the leek with its little top cap. I thought that he was so cute. Parsley, I sow just scatter in a bed, and then as it develops, I go in and grab just the portion of the leaves that I want to use for that particular meal, and I cut it about 1 inch above the soil surface. So by the time I work my way to the end of the bed, these at the beginning that I cut first will have developed new leaves in there, and it'll take a couple weeks. But that way I will have the bed replenishing its leaves with the parsley. And that's what I had mentioned earlier about the cilantro, that I can't really do that with cilantro because it's just a much weaker plant compared with the parsley. These are peas. Here's the blossoms, the little white ones, and then the pod itself. These are the ones that you eat the whole thing. It's a super snap. Here's the little flower extending on the end. And radishes, many kinds of radishes. This is called a Speedling tray. It's the brand name. It's available from Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, which is in Nevada City. It's mail order only. The website is groworganic.com. And it is a triangle shape. It's the square on the top and it goes down to a point, kind of like this. And then that's the one drainage hole down at the bottom. And what these do is they direct all of the roots that develop when I have seeded them in here down to that one hole. And then that provides for when I transplant it, it will not have any of that setback that I described earlier, because those roots are already headed down and they'll connect very immediately into the new soil, the new home. This is a bed of strawberries and lettuce that are utilizing different times of the year to do their main growth, whether it be the root system or the top foliage. So transplanting this now through November or so, alternating the lettuce with the strawberries. From now over the winter, the strawberries will develop really good root systems and just have a few leaves on top to do the photosynthesis. At that same time period, over the winter, the lettuce, you will continue harvesting the outer leaves, and you'll have lettuces between now and next March or even April. March and April will be about the time that the strawberries start growing foliage up top and putting out blossoms for your first berries. That's about the time that the lettuce will be starting to bolt and tasting bitter. So over the winter, you will enjoy the lettuce. Then in the early spring, you will have the strawberries starting to do their thing. Now, one note about berries and blossoms in the spring, I always pluck all of my blossoms, strawberry blossoms, off the plants until the weather is consistently warm, because then I let those blossoms set, and the berries that result are then very sweet because it has been hot weather. But of course, you may need the very first berry no matter what, and you just need to have that first berry. Your choice. That's the fun part about gardening your own. Here is spinach that I plant so that the outer leaves are just barely touching, and then I harvest those outer leaves and just leave the center 2 or 3 inch size leaves to continue developing the plant. Here's strawberries that have sent out all their runners, and I'm letting them root so then I can transplant those to another portion of the bed. Here, this is like that other bed arrangement that I had shown. This is the pathway. So I've got lettuce or spinach planted up front where I can easily reach them to harvest the outer leaves. Then there's a row of the celery, and at the very back is broccoli, so that I can go around to the back here and harvest all those small headlets that come up there. Okay, that's veggies. So now we can move on to the flowers, and we'll go somewhat quickly through these. Alcalia, both the pink and the yellow, and there are other colors. Certainly some you can use as ground cover instead of grass. The rest of all of these are Astroemeria. And this is the main pathway of my garden going up the hill, and I have it lined with different colors of these Astroemerias. Now, some of these, like this one, these can get to be 3-4 foot tall. That's this pink one. Oh, that's further down, the next row down. And some of them are very short. They're called florists, Astroemeria. So be sure to be aware when you are buying a particular color, whether it's going to be short one or a tall one. This one is called a Parrot, and it doesn't open any further than this, and it is one of the tall ones, but it has this brilliant red that comes along pretty further down in the season. Alyssum, both the purple and the white. This has the wonderful little fragrance of of honey. Amaranth. Now you'll notice that this has the little beige coloring in here. Those are literally the seeds. And I don't know if it's a particular variety that the seed is used in cereal and other combinations. But that's what it is when it goes beigey like that. And they are really good at self-sowing. You can very much use the tender leaves as stir fries or in salads. They are good at self-sowing. However, it's extremely easy to just pull them up. Here we have the Amaryllis in lots of colors. This is a bulb, and they will spread very nicely. Arbutus. This is an arum. I always was sad that this one bloomed in the spring because it seemed like a perfect one to be blooming just in time for Halloween. It looks so scary purpley. Here we have Asclepias, which is the butterfly and the weed, and this is the pink one. Bachelor button. This is bulb bean. This is something that I had brought a couple times when we were still meeting at Pasadena Groves. It's a succulent, and this blooming thing just goes on literally forever. It starts about January, and it just keeps going all the way. I think there's 2 months. November is when it's not doing much anything. Then it starts all over again. Calendula is definitely one of those good things in the garden that does self-sow. Camellias, cannas. Chasmanthe is a bulb, and it's quite prolific, both the orange one and the yellow one. The yellow comes out more like end of January and into February, and then the orange one comes February into March. So it's one of those nice things that has brilliant color during that time of year when there isn't much color of other things in the garden. The cornflower, crinum, this is quite a large plant. This is like 6 foot. And then the blossom stalk puts out these nice blooms. Crocus, here is the kind of crocus that is used for saffron. You'll see how I squished it in my finger. But this kind is really only prolific. This was from England because it gets cold there. They don't last for more than a couple years planted here. Cyclamen is one of those beautiful ones that is very much available in nurseries and has the nice colored foliage as well as, or patterned foliage as well as the beautiful colors. Daffodils. Some of the paper whites are coming up now in my garden. It always is a surprise to me because I expect them in this early spring, but they're doing it now. This is a tree dahlia. This is about 10 feet tall, and each one of these blossoms is about the size of your hand. And I've seen it only in this light lilac-y pink. I don't know if it's available in other colors, but the stalk looks very much like bamboo. Here we have the daylilies. Now, many daylilies, there are portions of the daylily that are edible and also other portions that aren't. And not all daylilies and not all edible flowers, all of varieties taste good. There are some that taste better than others. So this is something that there are books on this topic, have been for quite a few years. But also it's going to be a taste test by you to see which ones you particularly like. Here's Shasta Daisies. And when I had gone up to the Burbank garden, they had a bed that had about 5 of the different kinds of daisies that he had bred together in order to end up with the Shasta daisy. This is Dianella, and this is the fruit of a Dianella, and that color is the color. Sometimes blues don't come out in photographs very well, but this is exactly the color of this. It looks like a blue olive on the plant. Dutch iris, echium, which is a wonderful drought-tolerant plant that just many shapes. There's a tall, skinny one that's called Tower of Pearls. These are epiphyllum, which is more of a June bloom to it. But these are good. You just take a piece of this and stick it in the ground and it'll root, and then you'll come up with all sorts of different colors. This is the euphorbia, all of these different colors. This one is fun for kids because each year it will branch out. So this is 1, 2, 3 years old now. And it's a green blossom. This is feverfew. I think it got its name because it had been used medicinally. These are Freesias, Fortnite lily. Here's the blossom on this. And this fortnight means 2 weeks, so it does is blooming for that long of a time, but each one lasts just 1 day. And these different freesias. This is the species Freesia, which means that it's the one that all the other ones are bred from. And this has an exquisite fragrance. Most of these others look beautiful, but they don't have a fragrance. This is very sweet. So if you have a chance at getting this, it's kind of a creamy color with a little yellow center to it. I heartily recommend you get some of that. So this is called California Fuchsia. Here's the close-up on it. Gaillardia, native plant. Here's Gaura. Now this is goldenrod, and I'm sure you've read that goldenrod is not the problem when people have allergies. It's the ragweed that grows at the same time that is the real problem. This is Harden Burgia. This is the other one that's wonderful, like Chasmanth, for the color in the very early spring. This is like January, February. And I found out quite accidentally that if I prune this back severely by July 4th, then it will continue growing all of its stringers here for the rest of the time. And consequently, when it blooms in January, that this will be like a purple waterfall. And it's just exquisite. You see, they're like little teeny tiny sweet peas, and that's only the size of your little fingernail. And it has a little lime green center to it that just sparks up the purple. Okay, hollyhocks, many colors. Bearded iris, many colors. Irish bells. I thought this was just so cool. I had gone one of the cafes in Davis when we lived there had this in its little bouquet on the table. And I just thought that was so cool, being green blossom to it. And in fact, the little white thing in the center is the blossom. And one of the fun things about this is that when it dries, each one of these little bells on here forms like a three-pronged sticker at the back. And when an animal comes by, it will attach itself to the animal. And then when the animal goes and rolls in the dirt or something somewhere else, that will come off, and then the seed will have new territory to spread to. So that's one way of propagating itself. Here's Iracini, which stays this color all year long. Justicia has these beautiful yellow plumes. Here's lion's tail or lion's mane, and it comes in this brilliant orange, which I prefer, but also in a very buff color. So be sure to choose the color that you particularly like. And this is a fun one to start teaching botanical Latin to kids, because this is called Leonitis leonoris, like lion. Larkspur in the early spring. Here's Peruvian lily, Hymena callus, which is blooming right now in my garden. And I have dug up a clump like this and spread them throughout the garden. So that is really nice. You know, so sometimes if you see that a bulb seems kind of expensive for you, certainly it's going to proliferate. So you consider it very much a long time investment that will come up every single year. And that's whether you have it in a container or whether you have it in the soil in the garden. So it's definitely worth spending some money, especially on these ones that just have this great strange look to them. Spuria iris, sea lavender or limonium. The first time I ever saw this was when we had gone down to Laguna, and this was on all the cliffs up above the ocean. And I thought, boy, that is definitely a drought-tolerant plant. And it's kind of working its way down my driveway now as it sends out some more seed, and then just from the rain, it gets a foothold in the soil next to the driveway. Lavender. This is Melianthus, and this is just wonderful. This beautiful maroon stalk to it is like about 2.5 feet long. Mesembryanthemum, it has a new botanical name, but I can never keep track of it as they keep changing names on this. Generally, this blooms like April, as you'll see from all the wildflowers in front of it here. Here's paper whites that, of course, are yellow. Mums that bloom now, but this is the great time to split clumps and replant them. Here's some more of that nasturtium that just taken over. It even overwhelms some of the rose bushes. This is called Ferraria crispa, and it is brown and gold colored. And it has a stalk to it here that each one of these lasts only a day, but it goes on, the whole stalk takes about 2 weeks to have bloomed all of its individual blooms. Nigella, or Love in a Mist. This is quite beautiful now, sowing the seed. This is Nicotiana Silvestris. This is the nicotine plant, tobacco plant, This one, Silvestris, was grown in Thomas Jefferson's garden. So that's my fun thing of history to carry on in my garden. Pelargonium, penstemon. Here's those great poppies that are out at the poppy preserve. These are all the bread seed poppies, and this is what they look like when they are, I'm allowing them to mature completely. You want this to be absolutely crispy dry before you try to save these seeds, just so that they are absolutely dry. Ranunculus, Rudbeckia, 3 different salvias here that are, again, wonderful colors. This Salvia canariensis here has this beautiful mauve blossoms, but its foliage, it's green on the top and white underneath and on the stems, that it looks like it's cotton on there. It's just so cool. This is Costa Rica, and this is lutea, a brown blossom. Here's Peruvian lily, Scilla, the snapdragon stock. This is the species of the stock. It's just a single blossom, but it is so fragrant. And it just, it self-sows very, very easily. And I literally let it just come up anywhere in the garden except the pathways. And many kinds of sunflowers. Lots of succulents. That's the first thing I did during our March lockdown here, where it was recommended that we not go anywhere. So I took my entire collection of succulents that did not look like this. They were completely overgrown, and I repotted everybody up. I have about 4 times as many as shows in this photo. Sweet peas, lovely fragrances, and some of them are called knee-highs that are just very tiny. I prefer the ones that get huge like this, and remember that you cut more flowers, they will set more flowers. Tithonia, or Mexican sunflower. Now this picture was taken at the Fullerton Arboretum, and it's a very dwarf plant. The one I had grown got to be about 5-6 feet tall. But this one, apparently they bred to be nice and short. And Veronica and Watsonia, which is the same kind of a strap foliage to it, but it has these beautiful purple and reddish blossoms. And that's it. Lots of good stuff in the garden.
Thank you, Yvonne. We have a couple of questions in the chat. The first is from Jan, and she's asking if today's information also applies to container gardening.
Absolutely. There are some things like that big, huge crinum plant that you'd have to have a really big container, like maybe 20-inch or so, in order to accommodate those bulbs, because each bulb is about 3-4 inches. And so maybe after 5 years, it would completely fill that container. But again, deep container, as deep as you can manage rather than wide.
Great, thank you. And our next question is from Mary. What do you do to keep insects off your vegetables?
Well, I don't have much problem with insects, probably because I plant everything so completely intermixed that the pests can't smell which plant they want to head in on. It's like the difference between a monoculture where everything is the same kind of plant, like a field of broccoli, as opposed to mixing everything in. Also, I am constantly, amending my soil with more compost and more manure as I change each crop, so that I have a very rich soil. I have found the problem I have is with larger critters. Like I had put in a whole batch of lettuce, and it got nibbled down to the base. So I put some the fruit tree netting that I had purchased years ago, and as I would use it each year, I would end up having ripped pieces. So now I use those ripped pieces, I put them over my bed where I have transplanted the vegetables, and I put stakes in about every foot or so, so that any of the like skunks and possums, which I do have because they're going for the grubs in the soil, they can't get in there. And so that seems to be helping that problem. But generally, if you have healthy plants, which of course you can't guarantee from the nursery because most of the time they've been pumped with nitrogen, so they're very, very nice and tender and all that good stuff that snails and slugs like. But if you can get some of that, one brand was called Remay, which is spun bonded polyester. It looks kind of like cheesecloth, but it's much more unavailable for bugs to go through the holes. And put that on your crop, it'll allow the sun and the water to go through it, but it will be a barrier for like the cabbage butterflies and other things that are going to be munching on the greenery that is just put in the garden. But definitely having rich soil is going to get those plants going immediately. The other thing I have utilized is I've saved bottles from like Ocean Spray and milk, the clear plastic, and I will put that over the plant and kind of scrunch it in so it stays in the soil. And then I water around it and through it in order to settle the plant in there. And that's another physical barrier to any of the critters that are going to be coming and trying to eat those newly transplanted plants. But of course, you have to take it off when the plant, like my cauliflower now, is big enough and it's pushing the container off. So hopefully the plant will be less yummy than it was when it was tiny and new and succulent.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Precious. How do you recommend growing tulip, narcissus, and bearded iris bulbs in containers? Any best practices to keep in mind?
You need to, well, tulips I just consider an annual, because you generally, you can't get them to bloom again here because it just doesn't get cold enough. But the narcissus and those are going to be fine in a container because the bulb is only about 1.5 inches in size. So if you have a container that has enough space, like another inch or so between bulbs, then you can have 2 or 3 years of them coming back up again. Bearded iris also can go for maybe 1 year or 2, but because that rhizome grows out and then ups, you're going to have a hard time. It's going to kind of get to the end of the edge of the pot before it really blooms very well.
All right, thank you. And we have two questions from Kai. The first one is, are you familiar with the Village Homes Sustainable Community in Davis? And if so, are you familiar with any similar housing communities in Southern California?
We lived in Village Homes. We bought our first home there when we moved up there in 1980, and we still own our home there. We rent it out now. So I'm very much familiar, and we were friends with Mike Corbett, who built the whole thing in the first place. And I'm not familiar with what might be available down here. There was a place in Hollywood called Eco something, but I can't remember the name anymore. But perhaps if you just Google something like ecological farming or ecological living or something, you know, communities. I don't know that the Master Gardener program would be aware of anything anymore, because I was the one that was kind of connecting with all that. What is it? Lois Aiken, I think, was Eco. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm not aware of what might be available down here.
It does look like if people want to direct to the chat, Stephen has shared a couple of links that may be related.
Oh, good.
Next question, Kai's second question was, what flowering companion plants would you suggest for a backyard fruit orchard here in Pasadena?
Well, any of these things. This is all stuff that can be planted now. Certainly the things that are more the natives and the drought tolerant stuff, you know, Theodore Payne Foundation, and also the California Botanic Garden, which is out in Claremont. That used to be, they renamed themselves this year. They were the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. Both of those, you know, have just, they specialize in California natives. So those would certainly be the places to go, like all those salvias and the asclepias and all those things. All the native plants are going to be really great because they are going to attract the pollinators and everything else, and that's really what you want.
Great, thank you. Our next question is Xiaoling. I tried to seed California poppies for 3 years, but nothing happens. Do you know why, and any tips?
You're probably trying to care for it too much. All of the wildflowers, they really want just to be scattered and watered once just to connect them well with the soil, and then let them be. All of my wildflower collections that I always wait when the prospect is for rain, and then I will go out there the night before and scatter the seed, and then with the rain coming down, it'll lodge those seeds in the little nooks and crannies in the soil. Like native plants, they don't want any manure, and they don't want, you know, you can clear, if you have a little area that you want them to grow in, you should turn the soil and remove the weeds and things. But remember that every time you turn soil, you're going to have more seeds that possibly were there coming to the surface, and consequently you'll have to pick them, but leave the wildflower sprouts. So sometimes you can, if it is a small area, you can weed the area, water it, then pull the seedlings that are coming up, and then water it again. Do that like 2 or 3 times, so that hopefully you have picked up all of the weed seeds without disturbing more of the soil to release more weed seeds, and then scatter the poppy seeds and rain once, and then hopefully there will be some germination.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions for Yvonne, please put them in the chat and I'll read them out. We do have one additional question from Mary. What kind of irrigation system do you have?
Just about everything. Initially, my dad had put in overhead sprinklers on each one of the fruit trees so that it would create like a watering the canopy. But of course, he could let the irrigation run all night in order to make as if there had been a rainstorm that was going on for hours and hours. And of course, I can't do that because water is just too expensive now. So I will use that about once a month, literally to clean off all the leaves and enable the plant or the fruit tree to do its photosynthesis more easily because it's got clean leaves. In the beds, initially I had put soaker hoses in there, which worked well for a while, but then I was finding that the critters in our neighborhood were chewing the pipes up to get at the water. So I would have to be repairing those, adding the connectors, you know, where it was broken through. And then I found that my father-in-law was using the gallon-size containers. He was burying them next to his tomato plants. And so I adopted that technique, but I used the 5-gallon containers. And this is on my website, on my blog page, I have a search bar, which is above the archived past blogs. So if you put in irrigation there, you'll have all the different blogs that I've written, and some of them have lots of the photographs. But the thing about those burying the 5-gallon containers is because they have the holes on the bottom already. You know, these are the containers that you buy a large ornamental in or a fruit tree. They've got 4 or 5 holes at the bottom. So you fill it with water. It releases the water a good foot deep into the soil, and consequently the roots, whether it's of a tree or whether it's of your tomatoes or your lettuce or whatever, it will keep that soil a good 5-6 inches down and deeper, nice and moist all the time for the roots of the plants to go down to them. And that I have found best for generally in my beds. And then I use a hose for either filling them directly or watering in the basin of a fruit tree or whatever it is. So it's a combination of all those things, but primarily it's the 5-gallon containers buried and using the hose when a plant needed extra watering.
Great, thank you. And Francis had a question about the reference for an eco community in LA, the name of it. You could repeat that or say what it was.
Well, that's what I don't remember. The woman who was in charge of it was Lois, and I can't remember. Let me see if I can find something on here. Eco Village, Los Angeles Eco Village. And I'm getting on why it's coming up with a website. Okay, Los Angeles Eco-Village. And the link, well, just put that in, laecovillage.org. Yes, that's it, fine. Yeah, and Lois, if you connect with her, say hi to Lois for me. Because I'm pleased that she is still there, because this is 25 years ago that we first connected. So I'm glad that she's still in charge of everything. Very good. Thank you for the excuse to find that.
Thank you. And our next question, another question from Mary. How far apart do you space the 5-gallon pots, and what do you cover them with to prevent the breeding of mosquitoes?
Okay, you plant them according to the plants that you are using. Generally, the water will go out about 5 to 9 inches from the base. So I literally will plant a tomato plant, and then you know, maybe a hand and a half away, I will bury the container, and then the next plant and the next container. For a generalized bed, I will plant a container and then maybe 10 inches apart. And so I will stagger them, you know, kind of triangulate them through the bed. And that way I will plant my plants in all those intermediate areas. Now you don't cover that open bin, because when you stick your hose in there, the immediate water will go out the holes, and then as it fills up, it will overflow into the bed, and that's when you move your hose to the next bin. But it will sink right down in there. It won't stay in that container for more than a minute or two, because it's going out into the bed.
Great, thank you. And any other questions for Yvonne?
Let me add one thing. It's not like an Oya where you are burying this whole thing and you have a little hole at the top that you're filling it, and the water is just oozing its way out through the clay of the container. This is not that at all. This is a plastic bin that has holes that are a good inch, inch and a half at the base, and 4 or 5, 6 of them. And the water goes immediately out. It'll fill the container, but then once you move that hose to the next container, it'll move right out within a minute or two.
Great, thank you. And do we have any other questions from anyone today? If you want to put that in the chat. Just as a reminder, I did repost in the chat Yvonne's email and website if you do want to get in contact with her, have any additional questions after the program. I also posted my email if you're interested in joining the Pasadena Grows email list, or if you have any suggestions for upcoming programs. We had a great one from Jan that I'll probably be reaching out to you, Yvonne, about shortly. And but certainly any others. We like to keep things relevant and interesting. We're always looking for different topics. So give it another minute here to see if we have any other questions. And I also encourage everybody to scroll through the chat, because we did have some other great links and resources posted from Stephen, a couple other people, was worth taking a look at.
Great. I would suggest, just for people's ideas of what other topics might be available from me, on my website under services, you know, the menu item, services, and then speaking. And I have the list, it's probably 20 or more different PowerPoints that I can go ahead and discuss. And my newest one is the home composting that I did create just for my presentation in January. But there's a lot of other ones like container gardening and propagating and all sorts of different stuff. So, and certainly topics that are not on there that you want to know about, give me a suggestion and I'll create a new PowerPoint for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Yvonne. It looks like we don't have any questions right now, but you've certainly answered a lot and given a great presentation today. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Yvonne. And we hope to see you at the next program, which as a reminder is happening Saturday, January 9th at 10:30 and is about composting. So have a great rest of your weekend and take care.
Bye for now.